Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. I'm really glad to be able to do this topic in a recorded fashion so that we can share it with other people. And I wanted to say that as I thought about this presentation, I realized that what I was talking about could be applied to any situation. So I've been working with, some people who are doing positive behavior supports, and that topic can apply anywhere because what we're really talking about is what is the format of our professional development. So I'm going to share my screen and share my slides. Come on. And But what I want to tell you is that this came from a bunch of Deb was talking about how I was a legacy assistive technology pro a specialist. This presentation and this train of thinking came from the experiences I had working with school districts both in Oregon. I see most of you are from Oregon, and thank you for showing up. It's a treat to have you. Um, but it came from districts in Oregon and districts around the country who were doing professional development at some level. And they would say, I was hired as a consultant, and they would say to me, well, we did this whole series of workshops about text to speech or speech to text. And it was really good workshops, and we set them up really well, and either nobody came or we didn't see any results from our professional learning efforts. Um, so the big question for me is, why aren't students with disabilities getting the AT supports and services that they need? And I think the answer to that question is that the people around them don't have enough information. We talked, there were other incidents that helped me think about differentiating my instruction. For instance, some of you may be working on websites, and I realize that's an effort that's fraught with peril right now because things are going up on websites and things are coming down on websites. But if you are working on a website and you're providing lots and lots of resources, then it's really important to take a look at how many people are what your statistics are, and how many people are joining, how many people are downloading things, how long do people stay on the site. Those kinds of things are the things that tell us that we're doing a good job in our professional development because people understand what uh, what they're looking for, or they can apply what they're looking for. So we did a survey in a state I worked in, and we used this question all over the state. And here are some of the answers that we got. We don't know what stuff is available, which is a very valid and important thing to say. So that was a primary response, or people would say, well, there's not enough stuff. We don't have, I'm using stuff as assistive technology, but we don't have enough stuff, so we need more. If we had more, then we could do a better job. Um, in In our place, nobody knows what stuff we need. The stuff's too expensive. They don't know what to do with this stuff. Once we get it, it's fine. We can get it. Our supervisors support us in acquiring assistive technology, but the people who are supposed to use it don't know what to do with it. The stuff's too hard to manage in a classroom. They can't use their stuff on school networks. There and there are still times, I think, when we run into situations where the IT people are blocking the use of, I think, particularly augmented communication files, and that's a problem. We don't know if they can use the stuff on tests. So these were all reasons that people wrote in this statewide survey to say, this is why the assistive technology that's available isn't being used. And I will tell you that this is a state where assistive technology was reimbursed 100% by the State Department of Education at the time we did this survey, and we still got this list of answers. What we've learned over time is it's not about the stuff. It's not about the technology itself, but it's about how we share information and differentiate information about the work that we're doing. And particularly, I think these days about the purposes of the use of assistive technology. So I want to start out with, this challenge to you. I'm trying to grab a ribbon that doesn't want to go. About thinking about what can you do to improve AT professional development in ways that will build school capacity. And if you know my work, I'm very strong about looking at school capacity, the ability of people who are on the ground working with a child every day to do that job with the assistive technology that the child needs. So think about what you can do to improve professional learning in ways that will build school capacity. And how could you differentiate training materials? Oh, no. I'm sorry. I'm trying to make you discuss something we haven't talked about yet. So these are the goals for this session. We want to talk about what you can do to improve professional development. We want to talk about differentiating training and materials needed to support AT use, and then to document AT professional learning outcomes. One of the things I want to say here is that Deb Fitzgibbons and the Oregon Technology Access Program, and particularly the AIM cohort, have really been rock stars at this idea of differentiating the materials that we use in order to do professional development. And we're going to show you some of those materials during the session today. But let's move on to the next thing. Here we go. The thing about assistive technology, and I actually have been using this slide for about 10 years in different versions. But the thing about assistive technology is that we have not demonstrated as effectively as everything else technology integration. We wonder, after 20 or now 30 years of AT devices and training, why assistive technology eludes us. It takes more than just feature matching and tool demonstrations. to make technology an everyday tool in the classroom and to get classroom teachers to plan proactively with a UDL approach in mind. So, what can we do about this? One of the things we can't do is to blame the lettuce. This is one of my favorite quotes in the whole world, and it's from Thich Nhat Hanh, who you may be familiar with. He's a Buddhist monk. And he says, when you plant lettuce, it does not grow. If it does not grow well, you don't blame the lettuce. You look for reasons it's not doing well. It may need fertilizer or more water or less sun, but you never blame the lettuce. So often when I have done this workshop, I begin to hear people saying things like, well, we did the training and they're not using it. And we, we provided the equipment, we put it in the classroom, we come in every week and it's still on the shelf. Those are frustrating experiences. But one of the things that's implied in a statement like that is that it's the classroom teacher who's not following through. And for the most part, I think educators want to do a good job, and we need to help them with their professional learning to know what a good job looks like. So professional learning has changed over time. And it continues to change in these same directions. So from papers to digital resources, I never ever bring a paper set of pieces of paper to a workshop that I'm doing these days, unless I want everybody to take notes and do some work together. And for the most part, they'll go right to their devices anyway. So we've moved from paper training, where we spent a lot of time at the copier, to digital resources. We've also moved from a focus on software and tools to a focus on curriculum. And that's a movement that we're not done yet. We're working on it, and hopefully we'll get there. But one of the questions that I would have for you as you think about it, differentiating your professional development, is not only professional development about what, but how does it apply to some kind of student goals, whether it be goals like these that are basic curricular goals, or the goals that some of your students have who are more severely impacted, and maybe you're thinking about augmented communication or mobility skills or things like that. We've moved a lot in our professional development. Not that we don't use software and tools anymore, but we've moved a lot in our professional development to a focus on content and the things that we do in schools. And I see that as a really good change, but it's not been an easy one. People have, I, 15 years ago, I was doing technology training. I was teaching people how to use particular software, and I was giving them ideas about how to use it in a classroom and things like that. Those things are not things that we want to get rid of, but our focus needs to be on how can this student and these people who need to support this student help them have access to the curriculum. So that's a big change. We need, as AT specialists, some 21st century schools, but teachers don't need to develop those in the same way. Sometimes we want to share everything that we know about a particular topic with the teachers. I'm saying teachers, but it could be teachers or consultants or administrators. They don't need to develop those in the same way. And I think one of our jobs as assistive technology specialists, as leaders of our assistive technology program, is to differentiate what those people need to know and what's the best way of getting them that information. So we've had a lot of shifts in audience. In the way we address audiences, and certainly COVID had a lot to do with those shifts. But I've seen many people going back to old ways of doing things, but also I've seen an overuse of webinars thinking that people will use and support the information that they learned in the webinar. And one of the things that we know is that without follow-up and coaching, people use about 10 to maybe 20% of the information they get in a one-time training, whether it's just a lecture like this one, which I think is ironic, or a demonstration of a tool and how it works and what it does. All those things are important, but I think we're missing the boat if we don't think about this question. So how can we create an infrastructure in our district to support teachers and other educators who want to make changes in their AT practice? Just for a minute, I want to invite you to not think about people that you believe don't want to make changes. I want you to think about the people who are interested, who are enthusiastic about learning about assistive technology or AIM, and how do we create an infrastructure that meets their needs in order to make changes in their practice? And then eventually we're going to have to ask the questions of, once we create that infrastructure, how do we deliver it to teachers, and how do we know whether or not they actually make changes in their AT practice? In my experience, most of the data that we collect is one-time data. It's a story about a kid who did really well in a particular activity or using a particular assistive technology. So we need to create an infrastructure where we not only differentiate the supports that we provide, but we also are able to identify whether or not those supports are having any effect. I think there's an important concept to have as we talk about this topic, and it's the difference between a model for your assistive technology program and your operating guidelines. I see lots and lots of people who are developing operating guidelines that actually got invited in the last week to help write and revise a set of operating guidelines. And I love that. I love that project because it helps me and it helps the team to think about their model. So, one of the things that I think is really important is to know that what your operating guidelines say affects the model that you actually end up delivering. So if your operating guidelines say, oh, let's go back to a really old way of doing things. If your operating guidelines say that the only way a child can receive assistive technology is if they make a referral to the AT team in the district. Now, I'm hoping that that's a histor- historical statement and that isn't happening where you are. But but I do want you to think about what are the words in your forms? What are the words in your in the assessment resources that you provide? What are the words in the implementation resources you provide? And what are the words in the evaluation of effectiveness resources that you provide, and what do they imply about who does what? Because a lot of times the implication is the the person who does what, the who does what is the assistive technology team. So you'll get a referral to the team before the IEP team does anything about assistive technology. What does that model imply? We just recently had guidance from the Office of Special Education Programs at the federal government, and they said that the IP team can make decisions about assistive technology without a formal assessment. So that's one of the facts that's written into that myths and facts document. And what that implies then is that IEP teams have to know how to do that and have to have the information to make decisions about assistive technology for their kids. And what I want to say is they don't need to know everything about assistive technology. What they need to know is about the technology that's commonly available in their classrooms and the technology that might be delivered as a extra for kids who aren't able to benefit from the technology that's available in the classroom. So I hope, this is probably a good time. I've been talking a lot. This is probably a good time to ask, do you have any questions, and do you have any specific questions about this concept of a model or your operational strategies? And feel free to type in the chat, but I love it when people unmute themselves and just talk with me if you want to do that.
Well, Gayl, as you mentioned, we've had lots of conversations about particularly topics like this and accessibility in general. Who needs to know about that? Everybody and their children and everybody they know and their pets and everybody. So there are some things that everybody needs to know, and then we know that some people are more technical. So this is why we're having this session, of course. But what is it that everybody needs to know, and then delivering from there? We've been trying to make a stab at it, bringing different sessions and presenters and those kind of things I'm sure you're going to talk about, but um, it's really hard to know how to reach all of those audiences because you can't give them all the same thing.
Well, and I think it's not even a good idea necessarily to give them all the same thing. I think one of the big picture concepts that we're going to talk about in this session is what does an individual group of people need to know? So, like, for instance, next week, I think, on the 19th, I'll be doing a webinar for OTAP about administrators as allies. And I think that administrators need to know a very different bunch of information, a very different list of facts about any topic, but accessibility is one of them. And I think it's possible. My experience says it's possible to give them the information they need to know, but not to try and make it so that they know everything. Now, Deb, you're in a different kind of situation because you're charged with um, doing professional learning all over the state of Oregon. So that must feel overwhelming. And we'll hopefully I'll have some ideas for you too as we move forward. Anybody else got a comment or a question before we move on? Okay.
Well, I am going to make a comment about the data and tie that to what you just said, because when
Yeah.
I say data in my head, I know that on a national level for assistive technology, that it's really hard to get good data and pull it out of systems. I know on an Oregon level, we have 10 to 12 different IEP systems, and so it's really hard at a state level to pull it out. And most of the people on with us today are probably more at a school or district level. And that's where the data is that you're thinking about and sharing. So yes, it just throws my brain in a whole different direction in supporting and using data to show how we're going to show why we're going to make change. So thank you.
Well, and there's different kinds of data. There's the national aggregate data that you're talking about where we get information from all the different states and we put it together and we learn about, what a common assistive technology is. There's the Oregon data that sometimes is very difficult to get in our state because um because it's not coordinated. But at a school level, I think that particularly people who are doing professional development initiatives, professional learning initiatives, are able to identify ahead of time what they hope to see as a result of those professional learning initiatives, and maybe to identify ahead of time what kind of data or what results they hope to see, and that's data in the most general sense. So, do you have anything more to say about that? Oh, she's muted. Okay.
I personally am good with that and look forward to hear what you have to share.
Okay. Again, feel free to join me, interrupt me. I love being interrupted. It means you're thinking about what I'm saying and listening. So I made this list and it changes almost daily. It's a list of support options. How do we support the people who are uh, going to help implement assistive technology initiatives in a particular school, in our district, wherever it is? So we made a lot of tip sheets in my legacy activities. We linked to specific strategies for supporting struggling students. We made quick guides and cheat sheets We developed roadmaps, we developed blogs, we developed newsletters, we developed tool loan libraries. All of those things are valuable, and as you see here, that we could add another 25, but I don't want to take the time to do that. All of those things are valuable, but they're only valuable if we can, I believe, let me say, I believe that they're only valuable if we can target the groups that we're creating them for and the ways that those groups will help to, will be using them. So I want to say right now, I know you got a handout with this, excuse me, with this presentation. And it's a worksheet that I'm going to invite you to at least start. Excuse me. It's a worksheet that I'm going to invite you to just to at least start as you think about this. And you might be a good time to look at that worksheet because it's got all the big principles of what we're talking about today. Here's the first big principle. Define your base. The first step will be to define your base. Who do you need to reach and keep engaged to see your vision happen? Not what can they do for you, but what can you do for them? There's that. And then map out the ways that you can provide professional learning, professional development to meet the needs of the staff and therefore the students. So if you're defining your base, in my mind, you are narrowing down the topic or the work you're doing in a particular professional learning initiative to something that you believe a particular group of people need to know. And that's where we begin to differentiate our learning activities. Now, here's a slide for you. I want to invite you to use that worksheet and do the top half of the first page, or begin to do the top half of the first page. So it asks you, what is your professional development goal? What are the intended student outcomes? And then those two things I think are the most important. So do that and then look at the rest of it because that's what we're going to be doing as we move forward. I'm going to give you it says 8 minutes. That feels a little bit long, but I'll give you at least 5 minutes to do the top part of this worksheet. And then I am gonna ask for feedback and maybe even call on people if it's too quiet. So go ahead and do your differentiating learning worksheet at the top. Okay. Who would be willing to unmute yourself or write in the chat, preferably unmute yourself, and talk about a professional learning initiative that you are looking at offering?
Hi, Gayl.
Hi, Tim.
Hi. Um, let me go to the other page. Uh, so I kind of I have I'll just give you some backstory.
Yeah.
I have a medical supported classroom at Grant Elementary, and so all these students have severe needs. And so our professional development goal is have students at a particular school be successful in learning. And that was what I decided to write. And in the intended outcomes is decide what targeted goal for each student will be. So, and then the school audience needs to know that many of the students in the class have many skills, but they are challenged. And then training for the staff that work with the students is a program audience needs to know. So that was what I wrote.
Okay. And did you have something for administrators?
Um, I didn't think of that one yet.
Okay. Well, I gotta tell you, it's one of my it's one of the things I get really excited and probably passionate about is how can we enlist our administrators not to do a whole lot, but to, like, as you talked about, the school audience needs to know that the students have many skills. That's a kind of a thing that you're going to need some help with because yeah, are you the teacher in that classroom or are you a support
I,
staff?
I'm a support staff. I'm an
Okay.
occupational therapy assistant is what I do for.
Okay. Okay. Um,
So
so
so I'm oftentimes training the staff in the classroom to use whatever. Well, we have OGCOM specialists and we have speech specialists and then OT and PT. It all serve those kids, and
yeah,
it's pretty
that kind of
intense.
that kind of classroom usually requires all of that.
Yeah.
Um,
So I'll just kind of so when I said, oh shoot, um, Grant, the school needs to know. So that includes the principal of the school,
yeah.
um, because she just kind of she comes in and looks at sees what's going on, but she really doesn't stay very long,
Hmm.
and you know th- um, it's harder for her to uh, know exactly what's going on in that classroom.
So that's an example of some professional learning that's needed. I think it's possible if you see it as a priority, and I'm not saying it should be your priority, but it's possible if you see it as a priority to give some information to that principal about what she could be doing when she does come into the classroom. What could she be looking for? Do you have a particular child who, you asked for a high-tech device that costs a lot of money, and could she be looking at how that worked out? Could she be looking at how all the students are engaged in the classroom or whether they're all engaged in the classroom? So that's the kind of professional learning that I think uh, supervisors and principals need to know. And it's more about not having facts but knowing that they are the supervisors of these programs and to look at what it takes to do high quality programs. So how does that idea sit with you?
Um, well, some of the things that um, so the OGCOM specialists, we have eye gaze devices that we have are actually using in the classroom and
Mhm.
targeting some of those things. So it's we're pretty good with resources um, at the building. So um,
Okay, but
we have all kinds of switches and all kinds of stuff that's there. And we just kind of pull it out and go with it.
uh-huh. Well, you may, so what I'm suggesting is that if you want more involvement from the school and if you want more involvement from the administration, you may have to talk with them a little bit more about what's going on with those devices. How are those devices helping kids and what is it that they can do in order to benefit from the use of assistive technology?
Yeah, I think that it would behoove myself and the OT who's going to be leaving us this year.
Uh-huh.
Um, and to get together with the OGCOM specialist and the or and go to the principal and just kind of talk through some of this stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
Because
yeah,
one of the reasons people don't help is they don't know how.
yeah,
And so if you can tell them, this is the kind of help we need, this is, it may not be resources, it may be something else entirely, involvement of other school staff in that classroom, or the ability to send kids from that classroom out to other classrooms, things like that. So you all, yes, you're right. The best way to do it is for you all to talk about it and then come up with just not a lot. Don't make a huge list, but just the conversation goes, we were wondering if you might be able to, and then you fill in the blank.
okay.
So thank you for that example. I wonder if somebody else has another example that they could use in terms of this worksheet. Thank you, Tim, for being very brave. Let's see who's on. Oh, that's the wrong button. Huh.
So Gayl, while you're looking on who you're going to call on, I have been working through, we have over the last few years have been developing accessibility kind of presentations for different groups, and, including the definitions and the law and all of those kind of things. I presented at the the school administrators conference. And then out of that group, somebody from CTE, Career Technical Education, came to me and said, I would love for this information to be shared with our CTE group. I knew I was going to have to pivot and, look at what is going to make it relevant to this group. And, tying it to some of their initiatives, did more research and helped to show the line of what they're expected to do and how this fits into it rather than being something new. But the steps that you have and the conversations in that worksheet are the very things that I was going through. What does this group need to know that is different? So just another example from my world.
Well, and thank you for that example. So let, can I push a little bit? How did the professional learning goal change from the original presentation that you did to the CTE presentation? I'm sorry, I forgot who the original group.
The original group is, our own groups that we've been training over time and taking some of the base presentations and that we've, then in modifying it for the different groups. I presented to multilingual learners, to juvenile detention education programs, and this was going to be CTE in general. So the overall learning goal was still to know about the same thing, what is accessibility, where can I get help, but really it was a different So I wanted the group to have the same base knowledge, but really being able to tie it to the why. When you come to the why in all of those groups and stakeholder presentations, the why, it makes a difference in the CTE world.
Right. And I think that's such an important question. And this workshop isn't, I mean, this worksheet isn't really designed for that kind of, large scale, multi-agency presentation. We could create one that would be, but I think, you had a professional learning goal of the CTE people were going to understand accessibility better, and I'm assuming the accessibility options. If we use this worksheet, which we might not in your case, but if we can use it for now, the intended outcomes for the CTE people. What did you hope would happen after you did that CTE presentation?
Well, a lot of CTE teachers are not teachers by trade. They come from the community, so don't have an awareness of the kids that we're talking about who need accommodations and AT and AIM. So the first thing I was hoping was a level of awareness and being on that page. And then I was really hoping that it would lead to additional conversation and, asking them, what do you need next? So moving beyond that base level, where can we go from here? And so I don't have the evaluation surveys back from them, but I did get comments in the session. And so does that answer, or still kind of?
It helps me kind of go off and riff on what you said. So you wanted the CTE teachers to understand basic assistive technology. If this were a long and ongoing project instead of an individual, session, one of the things that you might want to be thinking about is, what do you want the supervisors of the CTE teachers to know about accessibility so that they can encourage those CTE teachers to use accessible formats, or at least know that they were there? And then, so that's the program audience. And then what at the CTE level, agency level, do those people need to know that might help to trickle down to change the work that's being done for all students with disabilities?
And so there were some administrators in that group, and the person from the school administrators conference was an administrator at ODE. And so she's really the one who asked me, can we gear this towards this group? And so I thought, well, what are the things that people can do right away? And so one of the things I showed them was a book share and how easy it is to check and see if your book is available in a different format. And so on that very base level, is your material accessible? It just gave kind of a quick first step that they could do. But just trying to show some of those basic first steps was what I focused on.
Yeah. And, a one-shot session is not, needs follow-up in order to be effective and have people actually apply what they learned. But
no doubt about that. But when I'm in the verge of retirement, I can't have that kind of a plan right now, can I?
Well, and CTE may not be the place that you want to plan. I think
True.
that's the question, the initial question at the top of the sheet is, what is your professional learning goal? And that should be, what is your most important professional learning goal? What are the things that you really feel need to be done?
Gotcha.
So let's go on, because I love it when we have conversation, but it always takes time. And I want to make sure we get through this. We will come back to this worksheet, And please do again jump in and comment or write in the chat if you have things to say. So here are some examples of customized whoop, darn it, I didn't mean to do that. Here are some examples of customized resources. As we develop training resources, I think we really have to think more, maybe more than we have thought before, about who our audience is. So if you haven't seen this guide from OTAP, and Deb did an enormous amount of work in making it absolutely beautiful, and I did pretty much work in writing it. If you haven't seen this guide, it's worth looking at, but know that the audience was originally planned to be students with disabilities. And Deb, I know you've done a lot of work in that area. How has it worked with students with disabilities?
Well, it's really the primary audience that we have used it with at this point. Throughout the development, you recall we had an OT who was using it with individual students to see, was the wording good, and how does it work with students? And then we've done it with a full workshop for dyslexia. But it's all been geared around students with disabilities. Could it expand to a larger audience? I think that there are pieces is that what you're asking?
Well, no, I just wanted to know what the primary use has been.
Okay, and then now I'm in the process of working with OGCOM folks in creating a workshop for kids who use OGCOM, and making sure that there are pages in their system and bringing our book into the system so that kids can work with it, and bringing parents and the kids together to work through the same type of activities, creating their circle of support, etc. But just looking at a different audience, kids and their families who use OGCOM.
Well, and I want to agree with you and notice that on this worksheet that we're using today, there are no students. And that may be a mistake on my part. I think it depends on the audience and who's joining me for the workshop, but I may have to add what do students need to know? There's intended student outcomes up above, but so maybe that's where we could put that. Another some other guides that we have been developing for really narrowing down the information and a targeted audience are teaching AIM self-advocacy skills, and that's a guide for elementary teachers that's targeted at elementary teachers so that they can begin to work with their elementary age students and help them develop self-advocacy skills. So that's another targeted piece of professional development. Once we develop these, and then there's a third one, which is just assistive technology in the IEP. Once we develop these targeted documents, we hope that we can use them with other audiences, but we know what audience we're approaching. We know who needs to know. So in the teaching AIM self-advocacy, I said we were targeting teachers of young students with disabilities and help talking to them about how you can help young students with disabilities develop self-advocacy skills. In the AT and the IEP guide, it addresses very specifically and in a very short format. Oh, good. In a very short format, the things that somebody would need to know during an IEP meeting. So it's only 4 pages. Where'd it go? I must have double clicked someplace. Let me find it. I know it's in here. Oh, for heaven's sakes. Well, here, let me pull it up. We've developed an AIM in the IEP guide. There we go. We've developed an AIM in the IEP guide that I think you might be interested in, and it is available. That's not it. Here we go. IEP Team's Guide to Accessible Educational Materials. Now, I'm going to scroll through this really fast, and I don't want to make you dizzy. So just know not to try and read it. But this is a 4-page document. It's printed on one sheet of paper, a big sheet of paper that's folded in half. And it has basic information about accessible educational materials, and then places where you can go to get additional information. This is available from OTAP on the OER Commons, and we're proud of this work. It gives enough information, we believe, for an IEP team to make some decisions about a student's need for accessible educational materials. And we also talk about, because we imagine this being used in an IEP meeting, we also talk about the documentation in the IEP. So it's got Oregon's IEP form in it, but you are welcome to take this and change it and put your IEP form where there's a yes or no box in here. I will say that Oregon is one of the few states that has accessible educational materials on their IEP. And I don't know who did that, but they were very smart people. It's a conversation. It's one of the special considerations. So there's not a big assessment required, but how do you have a conversation? And then the final there's stories about individual students who need accessible educational materials. And then the final page is resources, Oregon resources, local education agency resources, things like that. So this is a document that you can see is not very intense, and if you have it in your hand, it's kind of pretty. So it's attractive to look at, and we hope inviting to IEP teams. But it was targeted at teachers of students who might need accessible educational materials and their IEP teams. So that's again a targeted piece of professional learning materials. I'm sure that it can be used in other ways and in other places. I know it has already. But as we were developing it, as we were working hard on this project, what we did was to think about what we did was to think about who was our target audience, what were the outcomes, and what were the intended outcomes for students. And the intended outcome for students was that we would see an increase in the number of students who have AIM either on their IEP or use AIM in the state of Oregon. Deb, I want to invite you one more time. Is there anything you want to say about this guide?
Well, Gayl, as I think back through the process, we started thinking, are we going to modify the AT guide and include AIM? And it was evident right away that nobody uh, really wanted to focus on a 71-page document. They wanted to do something that fits um, the learner today, making it something short, something condensed, that they just can have at their fingertips. And like you said, to have it in an IEP, if they needed to share with a team member, etc. So trying to fit today's learner, we gave them basic information. And then as we looked at these topics, you'll see the videos that are housed also in the OER Commons, but we recorded these throughout the year so that we would be able to link them to the documents. So the feedback that we've gotten is that it is a great format. I mean, just so simple and basic that it's well, duh, why didn't we think of that? And so we've gotten good feedback, and people are taking it, using it, and making it their own, like you said.
Great. That's good to hear. So as I said, we're also working on a version of the same document that is assistive technology in the IEP. It's in a draft form, and going to the OTAP professional learning team for feedbacks. So we hope to be able to have that available relatively soon, probably in the fall. Okay, any other ideas that we've generated as we've talked about this? I'm gonna. Oh, there's stuff in the chat. Deb, are you watching the chat?
Most of the chat has been me making comments.
Oh, okay.
And following along. I don't see anything that isn't just a comment related to what you've been saying.
Okay, great. So let's keep going.
Gayl, I just want to make a comment that even now, when we are delivering a webinar of an hour and a half, you and I have talked about how some of our webinars that are longer maybe need to be broken down so that because people don't have always an hour and a half to sit and watch something. So even the attention span of being able to, we've been trying to decide what's the right time. 15 minutes is too short. What is the right time?
Well, and I want to say that's a big question, and that's a question that we need to address. But there's also the question of what are the formats that that different people need, because some people aren't watching the webinars. Other people are listening to a podcast on their way home or while they have their run in the morning, things like that. So I think it's really important to know our audience and to know what it is they need to know, and then to talk about the different formats. So I just want to go over the top half of this worksheet again, and then I want to invite anybody else who has a professional learning goal that they want to share with us to talk about it. So the matching the audience and the information is district level audience, program level audience, and school level audience. I want to say that when I think about school level audience, I tend to be thinking about probably a group of schools or a group of professionals. For instance, all the resource room teachers in some part of my school district, or all the resource room teachers who serve elementary schools. And what do they need to know? So if the goal was accessible educational materials, that they would, the topic was accessible educational materials, and the intended outcome was that more students would be using Bookshare to access their textbooks, then how would we develop a professional learning campaign that addressed all three of these audiences. That was the differentiation for all three of these audiences because it will be different. Resource room teachers need to know what accessible educational materials are and how to handle the materials that are available to their students and to them. And they most need to be able to know how to teach kids who use accessible educational materials. At a program level, the assistive technology specialist or someone like that may be wanting to, will most need to know a lot about the details of Bookshare and how to download file formats and things like that. So that's a whole different training topic that needs to be addressed. And then always still go back to the district level. What does an administrator need to know about accessible educational materials? Well, first of all, they need to know that they exist and what those words mean. They also need to know what their program staff and their individual school teachers are learning about those materials. Not that they need to learn it too, but that they need to have a good idea of what those folks are doing. Principals and directors of special ed want to know what the people that they supervise are doing. And we sometimes think, oh, I don't want to bother them. And that can be a difficulty. And it also can be a barrier to us achieving the goals that we want to achieve. So I'm always recommending what I recommended to Tim, which is to have a few ideas about how that principal who visits the classroom occasionally can help you. What can they look for? What could they do? And principals and directors of special ed sit at tables that we will never be invited to. So they sometimes hear about budget and information and things like that, and we don't hear about them. But we're going to talk about that next time.
Well, I just wanted to say too, Gayl, that what you're talking about with administrators, tying it to the issues that they're working with, somehow if you could make it tie into chronic absenteeism because kids aren't engaged, perhaps, or looking at tying it to somehow how it might even save them money, because a lot of times when people look accessibility, they think, oh, that's going to cost me money. But now whenever I'm sharing about Bookshare, this is a resource that is basically free that is going to help your team to be able to find what the kids need so you can save yourself lawsuits. There's another one that doesn't hurt to throw in there, but really saving time and money because this is a resource that you can use. So I just think administrators want to know about those things that really impact their decisions, and money's one of them, I think.
Absolutely, absolutely. And we'll talk more about that in the next session. Does anybody else have a professional learning initiative that they'd like to share with us at this point? You're welcome to do it. And if not, I don't.
You're giving me
TJ,
lots
I
of
saw you on
ideas.
mute twice, TJ. I saw you on mute twice, so I know you got something to share. Go ahead, friend.
You're giving me lots of ideas because one of the things I have the lofty job of doing is explaining to the entire state what what the AIM and ADA Title II means for the next 2 years and those
Oh
requirements
my
and
gosh,
how
there's a big job.
Yeah. But how do we look at the audience's difference? And, like you said, admin has been front of mind. And I know my one administrator, a lot of our administrators, especially here in Oklahoma, travel far from their home. One of my principals, anytime I can send him a podcast, he's excited because he has an hour and a half commute. So figuring out the different ways to hit them in the different pieces. And it really is, we've been talking about how the learning is different. Our admin needs to learn how to check for accessibility randomly, whereas our teachers need to be learning how to create it accessibility from the beginning.
And I would be saying to you that it's the program staff who need, I don't know your situation, so I'm making it up here, but it's the program staff who need to check for accessibility, and the administrator needs to know who's checking and what's the results are. So even a more detailed,
Those programs
um,
and districts get smushed really,
yeah,
and especially in our rural districts.
yeah, I absolutely agree. But this is a worksheet to help people think about things. So if you're thinking about things and getting um, good ideas, I'm a happy camper here. The one thing I want to talk about at the bottom of this, um, if we use the example of students using additional Bookshare files, what is the evidence of success? It could be the number of students using Bookshare files. It could be student achievement in a subject area. It could be teacher reports of ability to support students. So it could be that we've done a good job with our professional learning for teachers. It could be uh, teacher satisfaction reports. The thing we tend to do most often is give a workshop and get a satisfaction survey and then not follow through. And what we know from research is that one-shot workshops don't have a lot of effect. Like people will apply 10 to 20% of what they learn, unless there's some follow-up or some coaching or some support. So thank you for talking about another statewide initiative. And Title II AIM is a huge project, but I'll be interested to see, and I hope you let me know how you can apply this information or this concept to the work that you're doing. I want to talk about the bottom of that worksheet because it's actually designed for specialists and AT teams, but it asks you to just decide what kinds of approaches you're going to use for each target audience. So you just said, if I can give them a podcast, they're happy campers. So let's give them a podcast. And here's podcast on the list, but a podcast about what? What are you going to tell them? What's the content in that professional learning activity? School audiences need to know way different stuff. Teachers need to know how to make stuff accessible, and then your web people need to know about what the rules are about accessibility. So you've got a really big job, and I am impressed. But I hope these ideas help you as you begin to develop your professional learning activities.
I think Chandra probably on here is probably saying, you can make great podcasts with Chat GPT, and and you really can. So take content and it makes it into something that's interactive that people could listen to. Am I right, Chandra? Are you thinking Chat GPT?
Notebook LM in particular is really amazing.
It creates really fun podcasts. You'll want to listen to them first to make sure, but it just takes material, even the written material, and turns it into something fun and interactive.
Okay, but material about what? I think,
Well, I was referring to Tiffany whenever she's saying that she's talking about accessibility in Title II, even the most basics, pulling that information
oh, I see.
and having it be, people talking about what did you see, what that new workshop, the workbook is that the Oregon AIM cohort put together. And it just makes it seem like a news announcement. It's just fun, engaging. And Tiffany, I think it would be something that your folks might like whenever you think of podcasts. It's, oh my gosh, how am I going to create a podcast system? Well, it's so much easier now. That's all.
Or even
Right.
your prints. We do a monthly newsletter. Changing the monthly newsletter to where it's just a text converted to text podcast like that. Mm.
So
I
as
believe that
Chandra
people might
says,
really
the
like
thought
that.
that it's just one additional way to introduce information. Thanks.
Yeah.
Right, right. And
Right now on this, the first two that I'm going to be sharing are actually ones from Cast and from An Academy because let's just go to the people who can say it a whole lot cleaner than me.
That's another thing. Sometimes we think that we have to create everything anew when it could be there's something already out there that we need to be tapping into. We get stuck in that sometimes.
well, and I want to say one more time because I'm obsessing during this podcast or this webinar, but I want to say that once you know what your information is that you want to get to your audiences, then you have this whole list and other things that aren't, other things that aren't on this list about what you're going to be able to do for each audience to have those outcomes. So outcomes first, and then how do we do the training and information? And I want to learn about those podcasty things.
I also
Because
see on there where you're talking about for credit. And in most of the conversations I'm in, I think whenever you're talking about a way to give people credit for something, that's just another incentive. So doing something for credit, I like that you've got that on the list.
yeah, that I just finished a series of workshops for administrators in Pennsylvania, and they signed up, and every time if they attended every time, they got something that went toward the renewal of their administrative certificate. So know that it's not just teachers or OTs and PTs, but that can apply to just about anybody. Um, okay. We uh this was going to be the activity, but we did it all along throughout the webinar. We've had some great discussion, and I really appreciate you all jumping in and being there with me. It just makes it so much more real and so much more valuable when we can have real examples. Thank you, Tim, and everybody else who contributed. And what I hope you will reflect on as you leave this webinar is what will you look at to determine if your professional learning efforts made a difference? Because that's the last part of this circle is we do the work, we do presentations, we do all kinds of things, but how will we know if we made a difference at all? Because if we're not making a difference, maybe we should be doing something else.